Yes, I should have done a gauge swatch. That would really solve a lot of my problems here. I have to tell you, I love doing an I-cord edge. And so I fear now that the armhole is just ginormous. We call those broke girl hacks. Never made this mistake, and this is the first time. But I get it. I understand that there are yarns out there that are not thrifted. Let me explain myself a little bit.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for another podcast episode today. I am really happy to be sitting here right now and chatting with you because this is actually the first day that I've been feeling a little bit better since just a couple days after I filmed last week. So I hope you will bear with the sound of my voice and the cuts that are going to be throughout this video. But yeah, unfortunately, around Monday evening, I just fell under the weather and I have been down and out since, which is good for my knitting because it means that I've gotten a lot done, and I'm actually at like a bit of a standstill with a couple of my projects. One of them in particular that I really am so happy to be able to talk to you about today and get your feedback on, although I do think I know what direction it's going in. So yes, we're going to be talking about 3 whips, one of which is a new cast on, one of which needs to be ripped out, one of which is almost done, maybe 2 need to be ripped out, and an acquisition that I made this week. So I think without further ado, we should just go ahead and dive on in. So of the whips that I'm going to be talking to you about today, the one that has been on my needles the longest is the Sailor Swift top by Veronica Lindberg of Kutova Kika. I am knitting this tank top out of Knitting for Olive. You know, I keep saying extra fine merino, and then I question myself every time. So let me get one with a label. Okay. So it's Knitting for Olive Merino in the colorway Brown Nougat. I'm assuming that the reason I've been saying extra fine merino is because it says 100% extra fine merino, but the name of the yarn is simply Knitting for Olive Merino. It's a fingering weight yarn. I would consider this a pretty light fingering. I've really enjoyed working with it. This yarn was gifted for a project I had done earlier this spring, the Azucena pullover by Claudia Quintanilla of Unit Toronto. They gifted me the yarn for that project, and I just had some left over, and it worked out. It was a perfect amount, so I thought, for this tank top. So this is a ball that I haven't tapped into yet, but when I'm done with the project, I'll be able to tell you exactly how much I used. I should have weighed my scraps beforehand. Maybe I could even, okay, I don't know. I'll find out how much yarn I had used because I'm curious too. Now, this is a striped tank top, so that is my main color. For the contrast color, I'm still using Knitting for Olive Merino, but it's in the colorway Cream, which personally I find to be a little bit misleading, the name of the color, because I feel like the cream color actually has a more grayish undertone to it. So I would call it somewhere between like a true white and a slightly cloudy white, but I wouldn't consider it a warm color at all, which again, I think is just a little bit misleading because when I think cream, I do feel like that should be something that has a little bit more of a yellow undertone to it. So just so you know, if you're ever shopping online for Knitting for Olive, they have so many options for the colorways and multiple different whites. And so if you're looking for something that really does have like a creamy, more vanilla-y undertone, I would not actually select the color cream. As of today, this project has been on my needles for 26 days. I'm knitting mine in the size extra large, and I actually never did a gauge swatch, so that's another thing I'll have to just update on after I finish the project so I could let you know how my gauge was. Let's talk about this. So I hadn't done a gauge swatch. However, I cast on for that extra large size using the size needles that were recommended. That's a 3mm needle. And this definitely is that light fingering yarn, like I said. whereas the pattern does call for a fingering, but she tells you in the pattern that if you're looking for something that's going to be, a little bit more dense, and maybe if you're planning to knit it with more of like a positive ease, you might want to go for something that's like a heavier fingering or a DK even. However, if you're going for something with more negative ease, you could choose lighter weight yarns. She really does tell you how to best choose the weight of yarn for you. And I feel like as of right now, with the light fingering and the negative ease, I do almost wish that I had gone down in needle size, maybe size up, or even had a little bit of a heavier fingering weight yarn. So that's just something to keep in mind. I know so many of you have said that you're planning to knit this pattern, and you should. It's a great one. Okay, let me show you. So last week, I put a progress keeper in. Go me. I was right here last week, and so everything that you see below that is my progress. I think that this may look sort of abnormally long right now, because I am knitting this with the intention of only ever wearing this tucked in. Basically any negative ease garment in my wardrobe, I don't know that I have many of them. If I do, it's a tank top. And so it's always worn tucked in. I would absolutely never wear something like this just out. So I wanted something that would be really nice and long, like my store-bought tank tops are, so that I never have to worry about them kind of coming untucked or anything like that. So that was the goal with this. I will measure for you how much progress I've made over the past week. And if you're curious, it has in fact been a week since I filmed last. I am again filming. Oh, hi, Lucy. I am again filming and editing on a Friday just because I've been sick. This is not my typical routine, but we're running with it. So I know that last week when I tried this on, I said that I felt like it needed about 7 to 8 more inches before I could bind off. And I did knit about 7 more inches, which translates to 8 more white stripes. So 8 more contrast stripes. Now you can see down here that I have this really bunched up on a smaller circumference needle, and even more so than before because I have officially dropped my needle size down to a 2.5 millimeter needle, and I am currently knitting on the final little bit of ribbing that goes at the bottom of this pattern. I was holding it up to, like I said, some other store-bought tank tops that I have, and felt like it was at an appropriate length to start the end of the garment. So really, this will be done maybe today, definitely tomorrow. But other things that I've done since I last spoke to you was the I-cord edges on the armholes as well as the neckband. And I have to tell you, I love doing an I-cord edge, I-cord bind off, I-cord edge. I've only done them a few times, and every time I see that that's part of a pattern, or I have to do it or want to do it, I kind of like, oh gosh, that's going to be so fussy and frustrating. But I threw on an audiobook and just really got lost in my little I-cord edge, and maybe even was a little disappointed when it was over. I just really like the process of knitting the I-cord. I find it to be really relaxing, just kind of moving stitches back and forth on the needles. And actually saying that out loud reminds me too that something that I really tried to stress back when I first started doing these podcasts was some of these terms that you hear if you're a newer knitter, if you're a beginner, and you hear someone say something like I-cord edge, and it sounds really daunting and scary. So I do like to sort of demystify those things. So if you've never done an I-cord edge, essentially the process in this scenario was going through and picking up the stitches the same way that you would if you were just knitting a regular neckband or a sleeve, and then casting on a few more stitches after that so that you can start this little tube that runs along. And the way that you're doing that in simplified terms is just sort of knitting across those stitches. And then the last 2, so you'd be knitting one more from your sort of newly cast on stitches, as well as the one that you've picked up, you knit those two together so as to sort of bind them off. And then you just move the stitches that you just knit across back to your left hand needle and you work them again. And by doing that, you're sort of knitting this like endless tube, and it creates just the most beautiful finish. Now, this I-cord edge on all of these finishes was different from any I-cord I'd done before because Veronica Lindbergh sneaks in a little purl stitch into that I-cord. And her reasoning, she said, is to create more of a flat tube than a circle. So I think particularly if you're working an I-cord on a thicker yarn, you do get a true tube. And that's why a lot of people use it for drawstrings and stuff. But this, she really wanted something that had like that roundness to it, but sat a little bit more flat. And so within those stitches that you're kind of just knitting and slipping back onto the needle, there's one purl stitch in there that apparently is intended to help create just a little bit more of a flat edge. And I really do think that she achieved that with what, you know, she had you doing in the pattern. I held this up to my boyfriend and he thought like that actually looks really professional. And I was like, score. So I'm really thrilled with these edges, and I would even say for other summer garments, tank tops, t-shirts and things, if I was doing another I-cord edge, I would maybe consider throwing in that purl stitch. So all that to say, if you're looking at this pattern and you're liking it, but you're on the fence about it, I would maybe consider grabbing it because of that little technique that's in there. And you just learn so much sometimes with some of these patterns when a designer really has such a well thought out process. I love to sort of pick up the different techniques that you could learn from different patterns, and I think that this was a really cool one. So definitely that was fun to do. It was time consuming. That was also done on the 2.5 millimeter needles. So it definitely takes some time, but I think if you just throw on an audiobook, throw on a movie, and you just dedicate a couple hours to knitting that I-cord, that's the way to go. So I had completed that on the neck, the two sides. Also, you finish the I-cords with a Kitchener stitch, and that's not something I have a ton of experience with, and I still feel like I don't get it perfectly when I do it, although this is maybe the best I've done that so far. I think I get a little bit confused when it comes to sewing basically which direction I'm inserting the needle from on the Kitchener stitch. I think I let my stitches get a little bit twisted while I'm doing it, and it gets just a little bit confusing for me. But really, I mean, it looks fine and it's under the arm. So overall, at the moment, I'm just feeling so happy about this project. I've adored the process of knitting it. I would say that at this point, I mean, I have to see how this is going to fit. Like I mentioned the fact that when it's on, and you guys saw the try-on clips, was that last week? Yeah. And because it has that negative ease and I'm working with this extra fine fingering weight yarn, it does get a little bit gapey. So I'm curious to see when I block it if the yarn will plump up. And if it does, then great. If it doesn't, I mean, this is still going to be what it is. But I think either way, I'd like to knit a second Sailor Swift top and use either a yarn that's a little bit more plump, so a true fingering, maybe borderline on DK, or use another light fingering weight yarn and drop the needle size down to a 2.5 millimeter, but then size up to the 2XL. This pattern goes up to a 5XL, by the way, so great size range too. So if I could knit my stitches just a little bit more densely and then also knit the size up so that the ease is closer to a just zero ease or maybe a pinch of positive ease. I don't know. I would just be curious to see how that goes. And I almost feel like that mentality is coming from a place of what I've heard so many sock knitters talk about, where they're like trying to find their perfect sock knitting, stitch count and needle size and all of those details. That's kind of how I'm feeling about this tank top. And then it made me think I would absolutely love to be a tank top knitter in place of a sock knitter, just to always have something in the round. If I knit this without stripes, it would be the most mindless thing. Of course, once you pass all of the increasing and stuff, but even that is just like so intuitive as you go. So I don't know. I just have loved this pattern. I feel like I'm just absolutely raving about the Veronica Lindbergh patterns, but they've just been that good and that simple, while I also feel like I'm really picking up some things like that I-cord edge and the jogless stripes. And I don't know, I've just really enjoyed her patterns, and it makes me want to try maybe one of her more complicated knits and see how that goes. Maybe I should knit one of her lace patterns to see if having her video and just her pattern writing, if that would be helpful for me. So I don't know, I've just really loved her patterns. I've loved knitting this. I'm loving it right now and the idea of it. So time will tell if it turns into what it kind of has in my head. And I don't even mind knitting on the 2.5 millimeter needles for the hem, which is how I know that I think I'll be fine knitting on a whole garment with those. Now, that being said, so all I have to do now is I have, I think, 5 more rows of ribbing to go. It is a twisted rib. Is it considered a half twisted rib when you're knitting in the round and only one of the stitches, like your knit stitch, you knit through the back loop? Is that half twisted rib, or is that fully twisted rib, or is that just lazy twisted rib? Spider. Got him. Yeah, so if you know what exactly that's called, I just always feel like I never feel like I know exactly what to call it when it's only knit through the back loop and then purl regularly. Please tell me. So yeah, that's all I have left. And then an Italian binds off, which I'm going to do again without the setup rows. I believe that's what she says in the pattern. But that's what I'm going to do regardless, I think. And yeah, I'm really loving this. I'm so excited that it's almost done. At the moment, I can't recommend this pattern enough, and I might be knitting another one sooner than later. I just really enjoyed it. So yeah, this will be done literally today. Maybe tomorrow if editing takes me a while, but I'm really excited about it, and pretty quick too, as again, it's been on the needles for 26 days, 3 millimeter needles. So yeah, I don't know, so loving this. Glad that you guys are too, and we'll see it done next week. So that's the Sailor Swift top by Veronica Lindbergh. Next up is the Feelgood cable sweater by Anne Catherine Stoll, and I am knitting this ginormous oversized cable-y sweater in Barocco Ultra Wool Chunky. It's a 100% superwash wool, and that is the colorway 43103, a very sort of sandy color. I am knitting this in the size large, although I did begin knitting it in the medium, haven't gauge swatched, and eventually, after doing the increases for the medium, I felt like it was a little bit too narrow still, and I would prefer it to be more oversized. So I continued on to knit it in the size large. Now, this is the project that I said we might have to address something. So let's take a peek at where we're at. Here we have it. It's just about the most awkward thing to hold up because it's just so clunky and large. Okay, so I am knitting this on the recommended needles, which are a 6 millimeter needle. I have quite literally, I think I'm just 2 rounds into joining in the round under the arms. I had the sort of debacle last week of not knowing when I should stop knitting the back panel, because the pattern says knit until 15 centimeters, but make sure that you end on cable row, whatever. And those two things were not happening for me at the same time. So I had continued on just knitting the front panels and figured when I got those to the appropriate place, because that was what was determining the whole V-neck, that seemed more important to me. So I decided to just knit those and then kind of throw this over top of me like a little, tie-side vest or something, and check out how things were fitting under the arm and stuff. Now, prior to that, I should have read ahead for, casting on stitches under the arms and things like that, because I made my decision based on how things were just fitting when I threw it over my shoulders. And what I determined was that it was going to be a better fit for me to do another full round of the cable pattern so that I could land on the cable row I was supposed to, but I was going to have well over 15 centimeters in the back. And that was just going to give me a more comfortable armhole depth. Now, while I was making that decision, what I was doing was tossing this over me and then just sort of like kind of grabbing the front fabric and the back fabric and like pinching them together under my arm. And when I had done that, it was like, oh yeah, that's a little too snug. So that was when I decided to continue knitting that cable repeat. And now the armhole dropped significantly. And I was like, that's way more comfortable. But then I didn't realize that the amount of stitches that you cast on under the arm was overwhelmingly more than I would have considered it to be. And so I fear now that the armhole is just ginormous. And so I stopped a few days ago. I just put this aside and figured, let's just wait and we can try this on today and really look at it. Because I'd rather just stop now and rip back if I have to. At which point, I think I have a few options. The number of stitches that you cast on under the arm is not relevant to any other pattern, a number in the pattern. So it's not the width of a cable. It's not that it's continuing that around. I think it's literally just, this is how many stitches it's going to take to meet the size that this sweater is listed to be. Which makes me feel like if it's too many stitches, I could just go back and cast on significantly less and say have a very narrow strip or something. I don't know yet. So I think we'll try it on and see. I could also really go back and maybe just switch back to the size medium, which according to the sizes would still give me a significant amount of positive ease. That's the thing with this pattern. It is just supposed to be like, again, ginormous. It's supposed to be very big and billowy. And I do really want that, but I don't want to look silly. So I think, yes, our best course of action is going to be to just try this on and see what we've got. Before we do that, though, I did want to show you a little hack that I came up with over here. So the cable repeat is a long one. It's multiple rows, 20 rows or so. And for most of that, you're not doing anything significant. You're just, knitting the knits and purling the purls. And then you have to remember to just do those cables on the 2 rows that it requires. And it would have felt very silly for me to have one of my little row counter chains of 20 rows. That just seems like a lot to have dangling off of the project. But I also didn't trust myself to just do 10 and then try to keep track. And I don't know, that seems a little bit nerve-wracking to me. And then I remembered that my aunt had given me a couple of these little row counters that are intended to go on your like flat knitting needle so that you could count the rows in between. And so they don't work on a circular knitting needle because they're supposed to sit on the needle. So that wouldn't work for in the round. But it would work for counting rows. So I threw it onto a big safety pin and I used a stitch marker to just kind of link that on as my beginning of round. And I am planning to just twist that to the correct number every time I reach the end of a round. And then I will know exactly when to cable. I just have to remember which row I have to cable on and how many rows I have to go to and then stop at. And so there's a little bit of thinking involved still, but it's not the end of the world. So I thought that was a clever little hack. We call those broke girl hacks. With working with what you got. So it gets the job done. I'm pleased with it. And so, yes, let us move this over to some try-it-on tubing, because that's the thing too, is this has been on the needles this whole time. So I've never been able to like really stretch it out and see how things are going to go. I know that Superwash claims to block out like crazy. However, in the limited experience that I have with Superwash, I actually haven't had it really block out like crazy. So yes, I should have done a gauge swatch. That would really solve a lot of my problems here. However, lazy, not doing it. So we're gambling, and that makes it more fun. So we'll see what happens. I don't think I've mentioned yet, but this guy has been on the needles for 12 days. So, all right, let us try it on tubing. Got it right here. And we could do some try it on tubing and chat. I don't know why that brings me so much joy, but it does. All right, let's get this moved over. Since I've been under the weather the past week, I have fallen even more behind than I was already on comments and just admin stuff. So thank you guys so much for your patience, but I'm happy to report that as of right now, I have received emails from all but one of our Stash Bus Spring prize winners, and we are coordinating getting them their prizes. So I'm really happy that pretty much everyone has reached out, and that all went well, because I was nervous that they wouldn't see that they won, and we'd have to go back to square one. But right now I just have one person who has not reached out, and so I just sent them a message on Instagram, hoping that they will see that. But I just loved reading everyone's comments on the messy dressy and about Stash Bus Spring, and I think it's so wild and so cool that just a little idea, a little challenge, something that I wanted to do personally, turned into something that was able to motivate a lot of people. I had people saying that having that little challenge of using up some stash yarn got them out of their knitting slump that they were in, or helped them to really address some yarn that's been in their stash for years, some people decades. And that's just really, really cool. I figured I couldn't be the only one who was staring at a fairly overwhelming stash and wanting a little extra motivation to get through it. And so it was very validating that was in fact the case, and really fun to see what everyone was able to work up. I have a feeling that come sort of gift knitting season, I will be referring back to a lot of the comments on what people had said that they used their stash for, because a lot of people were sort of trying to eliminate those single skeins in the back of the stash. And so I think that would be great for gift knitting and things like that. And yeah, I just thought that it was so cool. I don't know. I just thought that I was going to knit up a couple things Stash Bus springy, and maybe a couple of people would join in, and we just wound up having such a overwhelming response to the knit along. So thank you guys so much. Naturally, I just dropped some stitches, as I do. I also always get a lot of comments when I do this segment that people say that they don't actually put the try-it-on tubing, like they don't move all of their stitches all the way over, and instead they just put on the try-it-on tubing so that they can stretch out the stitches across their cable, their needles, and then, the leftover on the tubing, and then they try it on that way. And I feel like you must have knowledge of some sort of magic that I don't, because I drop enough stitches just trying to shift these things over and being fairly careful. I feel as though if I were to put this over my head with the try-on tubing still on the tip of my needles, it would just, I would lose all of my stitches. That would be the end for me. So I'm glad that that works for some people, but I definitely don't think that that would work for me. If anything, I'd just be too nervous that that would be the case. The other thing that people say is that they will just use like a cable extender and try things on like that. And I would do that. I think the only thing that for me, I like having the try-it-on tubing because it's so flexible and it doesn't tend to like hold the stitches out the way that a cable would. The stitches could live a little bit more naturally the way that they're going to when they're not on a cable or on try-it-on tubing. So that's the reason that I just use the tubing. And for me, I don't mind this one extra step. I do try to pretty quickly throw the stitches back onto my needles after I film this segment, because otherwise I do fear they would just sit on that try-it-on tubing and I would say, oh, I'll move them over later, and I never would. But I really don't mind moving them onto the tubing. I feel like for me personally, it gives me the most accurate representation of how the garment is going to fit once it is complete. So that's what we're going for here. I also was glad that I had talked about, just briefly mentioned, that the superwash yarn for me is just, it gives me slight acrylic vibes. And I use acrylic yarn. That doesn't bother me. For me, the issue is more that it doesn't tend to come at an acrylic price, superwash yarn. So, well, I guess then for me to gravitate towards the superwash, it would have to really be for the purposes of the ease of care. And I don't think that at the moment I have any knit that I wear enough that warrants enough washing and laundering that it would be bothersome for me to do it by hand. I don't know, I enjoy the investment and the process of time that it takes to hand wash my knits. And I actually think it's kind of fun because I certainly don't hand wash any store-bought garments. So it just kind of seems like another way to kind of connect with my projects and my knitting. And so I don't mind doing that. And therefore, for me personally, the superwash hasn't totally won me over yet. That being said, I'm sure that there is some superwash yarn out there that could change my mind. I just have not yet found it. But I will say that as of right now, this Barocco Ultra Wool Chunky is probably not my favorite. That being said though too, I actually have this yarn in two different weights. So the Barocco Ultra Wool 100% superwash, I think I have it in just the regular as well as a DK or a fine. I don't know what they call it exactly, but it could also just be the fact that this is a chunkier yarn that's giving me the overall experience of something a little bit less luxurious. And maybe I'll feel differently with a different weight of yarn. We will find out as I'm hoping to cast on a couple more projects with those yarns in the not too distant future. So we shall see. I'm coming up on the last few stitches here. Got things like a little bit twisted here, so hang on just a moment while I concentrate, and there we go. Off the needles. Happy 4th of July to those of you in the States. I actually had I was doing hair for a 4th of July themed wedding on the 3rd, which that was fun. It's certainly not something I've seen before, and I can't say that I don't know that I've ever worked a wedding whilst having a fever, but you do what you gotta do. Can't bail on a bride on our big day, so you make it work. But yeah, happy 4th of July. Oh boy, as I'm moving these stitches over, I'm realizing just how big this sweater is. Now, I have made claims before. I do love me a good heaping amount of positive ease. Somewhere along the way there, my camera ran out of space, and I'm not sure where, but I think it's okay because I think I was just rambling anyway. So we are off of the needles. We're on the try-it-on tubing. I got all the stitches spread out, and I am dying to get this on my body. So let us end the try-it-on tubing and chat. All right, let's just try this on. I think this is also a perfect example of why I don't love to try things on when I've just connected in the round, because I don't think you could really tell. It's like not stable enough yet. Oh gosh. All right, let us see what's going on here. So it's important to remember too that there is going to be some sort of finishing along this edge, although it's nothing significant, but it will be enough to just, I think, draw in a tiny bit. And otherwise, like, is this even under my arms? Oh yeah. Okay. Let me stand up and I'll get some B-roll. Okay. Let me explain myself a little bit, because I think that this is very difficult to see really what's going on right now. Okay, so had I continued just knitting the medium, the difference would be that this whole cable on all sides would not be there, right? I believe that if I had just gone with the medium, it would only be these 2 large cables and then not this one on the end, which would still give me a drop shoulder, but it wasn't going to give me that like super oversized look that Anne Catherine has in her photos, which is what I wanted. So I'm actually very happy, I think, with the fact that I went for the large. I think that for me, that's giving me a ton of positive ease, because I could see that even when this is blocked, that drop shoulder, it's going to be very low. And I liked that idea. So I think I'm happy with this size large in that respect. And I think I feel like I'm right that the issue really is just the amount of stitches that were then cast on underneath the arm. I think is just so dramatic. Now it almost doesn't know where to sit on me right now. Again, this is why I don't like to try things on when I've just connected under the arms, because I don't think that you really can tell where it's going to sit. But regardless, we can see that under the arm, I mean, this is now the armhole. And yes, I want an oversized sleeve. I want an oversized sweater, but I feel like this armhole is overkill. I'm glad that I stopped. If I am going to kind of pinch this and see what feels reasonable here. Is this the side that's, yeah, okay. So this is the beginning of round side. This is the non-beginning of round side. So you could see, I mean, this would be an obscene armhole. And I'm just not even sure. I don't know. It's awkward. So I'm thinking that I go back to the point before I joined in the round. And at that point, I think that this is about a reasonable armhole, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. About 13 stitches less than what's there. And so like I had said, the stitches that are cast on under the arm, they're not cabled. They're just knit across. So I feel comfortable just not casting on 13 of those stitches and simply having a skinny knit panel in between the front and the back. I think that wouldn't bother me. I'll try to compare it to however many stitches I picked up and make sure that it looks sort of accurate. And then I'm going to read ahead to the sleeve. And my assumption is that I could do something similar in the sleeve and just have like a narrow strip of knits running down, and I'll have to then just sort of figure out somewhere between the medium and large how many stitches I'm picking up for the sleeves. But I do feel like this would give me a rather excessive body, even for my taste. But I feel like the medium wouldn't have given me as much of this slouchy drop shoulder as I wanted. So we're going rogue a little bit here, you guys, and I think we're going to have to just knit something in between. And I understand that this is the complicated part of cable knit patterns and determining the sizing, because let me tell you the bust circumference difference between the medium and the large. The medium is supposed to give you a bust circumference of 160 centimeters, whereas the large is meant to give you a bust circumference of 188 centimeters. So that's nearly a full 30 centimeter difference, which in inches, by the way, let me show you even what 30 centimeters looks like. That's 30 centimeters. That's like an entire foot. That's exactly 12 inches. So that's a huge difference when you're talking about adding that onto a sweater. And then to take that away is also a huge difference, where I feel like, this actually makes perfect sense now, that like 13 stitches or so on either side is going to give me about half of that. So I am just knitting this right in between the sizes medium and large. And right now I'm not concerned about that because I feel like it's easy enough since there is just a very like abstract, unrelated number of knit stitches under the arms as it is. So I think that's going to have to be the game plan. After this, I'm going to have to rip back the 2 rows I think that I had done, and I will cast on 13 stitches or so less underneath either arm, and hopefully that gives me the fit that I am interested in. So that's what we're going to have to do. It's also particularly tricky because you are joining your V-neck at the same time that you're joining under the arms. You don't have an opportunity to like knit the collar to see exactly how it's going to fit and everything. So there's a lot of little variables with this that are making the fit just a little bit more tricky than it needs to be. However, seeing it on me right now, I do really love the cables. I love the color, so I'm excited about it. I'm happy to take the time to make that little adjustment, and hopefully it is just that, a little adjustment. So that's the deal. This is the Feelgood Cable Sweater by Anne Catherine Stoll, and wish me luck with trying to adjust that. Okay, now in the beginning of the video, I said that there was one project I knew I was going to have to rip back, and that is also the project that I decided to cast on since we spoke last. So last night we had a soccer game to watch, and the Taylor Swift top had just hit that point where it was ready for ribbing, and I wasn't comfortable enough doing it without looking while watching the game. Of course, the Feelgood cable sweater was just not in a place to work on it at all. Plus, I can't knit on that while I'm not looking. So I was ready to cast on something that could be that mindless knitting for me, and I decided to go for something that I've been eager to knit for quite a bit now, and that is the Tulsa tank by Rebecca Clow of the Crayabea. I'm certain that you've heard of these patterns before, of Rebecca Clow before, but this is one of her really awesome patterns where you buy one pattern for the bang of your buck is that you're getting like 6 different patterns in one. This is 3 patterns in one, but with like unlimited modifications that you could make. And So I think for me, someone who's like interested in designing, but is still a beginner enough knitter that I'd like to see. I'd like a bit of a guideline, a hold the hand process. I like the idea of having this pattern in my library, and I actually had applied to test this pattern back when she announced for testers, and I had just thrifted some yarn that I was like, this is meant to be. But I didn't get to. I was not accepted to the test knit. However, I had already done my gauge swatch, and having applied for the test knit, she gives you an extra discount on purchasing the pattern on release weekend. So I bought it then, got that extra discount, had the gauge swatch ready to go, and was able to just go ahead and jump in. So there are 3 different versions that you can knit. There's a square neck, a crew neck, which that one's called the vest, and then the cami, which is what I'm knitting. It's a V-neck sweater. Now, all 3 of them are cami tank. All 3 of them are knit bottom up. So it was ideal to just cast this on literally 10 minutes before we were watching the game last night and go in stockinette. It is intended to have ribbing at the bottom, but I decided that I really didn't want any ribbing on my cami. And so I figured I would just cast on with the long tail cast on, and I could always revisit it with an I-cord or a sewn folded hem later on, or just leave it raw. So that's what I had done. Let me show you what I got done in just the hour while I was knitting during the game. Well, actually, here we go. This is the gauge swatch that I had done. Now, I had done this on the recommended needles, which was a 5mm needle, and I had blocked this, and personally, for my taste, this was still just a bit too holy. However, I did get gauge with this, this swatch, and she's undecided today where she wants to be. So I decided to cast on with 4.5mm needles, and it's another pattern where I feel like I just land in between sizes. So I went for the size up. So I'm knitting this in the size 5, which I think said would give me about 48 inches in the bust. I'm about a 42-inch bust, and I don't exactly want 5 inches of positive ease, so I'm hoping that the size smaller on the needles will just kind of shrink things in a little bit. And then also when I block this, I definitely will, do so accordingly. However, I made such a rookie mistake in my haste to get this cast on last night, and I've actually never done this before. I've never made this mistake, and this is the first time I cast it on, long tail cast on. There's 200 plus stitches, so I was just like, get it on there. And then I just started knitting in the round, and I felt so good about the fact that I had gotten this started. And I was really struggling. I have this on, again, really small circumference needles because I prefer these cords. I have to get longer ones. And I was like, why is this so twisted up? Like, what is going on? This is so frustrating. It kept twisting on me. And then I realized that I let my cast on twist. And so there is an actual twist in what I'm working here. And so I have to unravel all of this and start over, but that's okay. I didn't get much done, and it is what it is. Not the end of the world. So I will be taking this out and starting this over again, probably tonight or this weekend, for my mindless knitting. And I am curious to see how this goes, because between the Sailor Swift top and now this pattern, I feel like I have so many ideas for tank tops, and I'm feeling really excited about them for my summer knitting, which is good, because if you've been here the past couple weeks, you know that summer knitting has been kind of daunting to me lately. So I'm really excited about that. I am knitting this, like I said, out of some thrifted yarn. So this was that Alina mercerized cotton yarn that I had thrifted, each ball for $1. And it's in this just beautiful, beautiful plummy color. I think that this color is going to be so nice for like an evening wear V-neck tank top, maybe something like a little saucy. And I think it's just gonna be really nice in that mercerized cotton. So far working on it, I don't feel like my hands have adored the feeling of the mercerized cotton, but it hasn't been horrible. And it's an interesting twist, that it's a very defined twist, and I like the look of that. But I noticed it was just the littlest bit splitty, more so in the cast on than in the working up of it. But just something to note if you find a yarn that's like this. I don't think that this is a yarn you could find anywhere. new. I found this at the thrift store. One thing that I did think was kind of funny and like maybe a little misleading is that this ball of yarn seems so plump and bountiful. It's very similar to a knitting for olive yarn, right? So this is 50 grams, and of course it's fingering weight, so you get 250 meters. This is 50 grams, and it's a little closer to a worsted weight, so you're getting 100 meters. However, when I had wound up a cake of this yarn, I discovered that inside was this little foam donut. And so like the majority of this density is made up from this little piece of foam. I thought that was interesting. I'd never seen that before. I was like, that might be a little misleading, but whatever. I have a very sophisticated bag of 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the 5th skein that I already tapped into here. So hopefully that's just enough to get this done. We'll have to just see. So yes, I will be ripping this out very soon and just starting over, but I don't plan to change a thing. Let me know if you're working on any Tulsa tanks this summer. I know it's going to be a big pattern for the season, and I'm just really happy to have, like I said, like a very basic pattern. I think I'd like to maybe knit up the square, the crude, all of them. I'd like one of each. So let me know if you're working on any of those too. And yeah, that's been on the needles for less than a day. I'm not even going to count it. We're just going to start over and I'll start from scratch with that. Me oh my, I have been talking for quite a bit. I think I'm excited because I haven't been talking all week since I've been sick. So those are the whips that I've made progress this week, the new cast on. I did mention last week that I was going to be stopping by Pick Up Every Stitch in Mount Kisco, New York. I was working a wedding over there last Saturday, and I was able to drop in afterwards. I ran into and wound up having the greatest conversation with a viewer of the channel and a friend of hers. We talked about not remembering people's names, and I remember as Shonda and Tanya. And so if that's wrong, you girls understand me. What you should know though, or a little like inside joke now, is that I do remember you as Come and Go and Shaky Monkey. So that's between us. But we wound up having such a lovely conversation, and we were ogling all of the Sandusgarn yarn at Pick Up Every Stitch. That was 40% off. Unfortunately, they didn't have any of the Lena yarns, which is what I really wanted to see there. However, I did pick up some yarn, and I also was able to touch and get a feel for the Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, which I'm intrigued by and curious about working on for some summer projects, but I'm a little bit hesitant because of the price. So I think that this weekend I'll be getting out to maybe look at some more summer fibers before resorting to just ordering something online. However, so I did pick up something at Pick Up Every Stitch. Since Sandusgarn was all 40% off, and I feel like I just had my Knitting for Olive merino tank top on my mind when I saw this Sunday, I was just very excited about the look of it and the idea of this for maybe a summer tank, maybe another Sailor Swift or the Tulsa tank. But this is Sunday. It's one of the petite knit colors, right? That's how they do it. I've never used Sandusgarn before. I feel like we're really, working our way up in the world. But this is 100% merino wool. It is 50 grams to 235 meters. And again, just for reference, this Knitting for Olive merino is 50 grams to 250 meters. So I guess that does sort of justify my point in this being a little bit more fine than this yarn. So maybe this would be the perfect thing to work into another Sailor Swift top. I was chatting with my new friends about the color of this and whether or not this was like exactly a good color for me. And I feel inclined to say I like this color for me. So for a tank, I think this will be nice. What color is it? 3536 looks like is the colorway. Everything's in Norwegian, so it's a little bit of a struggle for me here. But yes, I really liked the color of this, and I picked up 4 balls of it for a total of $26.01. So each ball of yarn was $6. Now, that was the 40% off price. And this is just my thing where like I'm so new to, I'm going to call this like a luxury yarn in my head. I should be able to knit a tank top for myself with 4 balls of yarn for $25, like full price. That makes sense to me. But I get it. I understand that there are yarns out there that are not thrifted. And that's just something that, we work in when we can. So because it was on sale, I was excited to play with it. And maybe this will even be cast on sooner than later. I could picture this as either a stripeless Sailor Swift top or the Tulsa tank with the square neck. I don't know why I think that might be kind of nice for this color. Let me know what you guys think. So that was my acquisition for the week and my just fun story of chatting with the ladies at Pick Up Every Stitch. We literally shut down the store. I had no idea that it had closed or that I had been there for 2 hours until they said it was after 4 o'clock and the store closed at 4. So we had a great time laughing and chatting and just talking knitting and just chatting with the girls. It was a good time. So that was very fun all before I came down with my sick. But yeah, so that's the acquisition. Those are the whips. The plans are ripping out the Tulsa, ripping back on the Feelgood cable knit, finishing up the Sailor Swift. So it feels like next week will be a bit of a fresh start, doesn't it? Otherwise, I think that is all I have. I'm going to go ahead and say it now as this has taken some time to film. I hope you guys will understand if there's a bit less kind of fun editing in this video, as I'm just kind of excited to get this out and be able to film today and feel a little bit better. So I'm probably not going to go as crazy and have as much fun with the editing as I usually do. I'm sure you guys will understand. So hopefully next week we are back to the fun. And until then, I hope that you are finding joy in your summer knitting and whatever's left from your stash after Stash Bust spring. And I'm looking forward to seeing where the summer takes us in our knitting plans. All right, you guys, if you enjoyed this video, I would so appreciate it if you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you subscribe and ring the bell, you'll be notified anytime I post a new video, though I do post a podcast video just like this one every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. If you'd like to follow things in a little bit more real time, I do encourage you to check me out over on Instagram at akanoraknits, where I still need to post the photos of the messy dressy. That is how much I was just down and out this week. So here's to getting caught up over the next week. Anyways, big ol' thanks for watching. I will catch you all in the next one. All right, you guys. Bye.